Hello there. More paperwork and higher costs. The British music industry is suffering from Brexit because performing in the EU is now much more complicated. This has serious consequences for young ensembles in particular. Mark Pemberton's Brexit record is mixed. He's the head of the ABO, the Association of British Orchestras. The association represents the interests of orchestras in Great Britain. On the whole, Mark Pemberton is satisfied with the freedom of movement for British musicians in the EU. Countries tend to set a deadline, say up to 30 days, in which you can work in the country without a visa. But you still have to do paperwork. And there are also still countries that say, no, you need a visa. And you have to pay for it too, of course. It's the third country now. According to Pemberton, it's difficult for opera singers who often have to be on site for a long time to rehearse their pieces. They almost always require a visa, making it more inconvenient and expensive for opera houses to hire British singers. However, Pemberton sees a very decisive disadvantage from Brexit in the transport of musical instruments. That's the real killer that hit orchestras really hard. A lot of our members have their own truck, employ a driver, and transport their instruments. But they are treated the same as a commercial transport company transporting supermarket goods for sale, he says. At this point, the trade and cooperation agreement completely failed the music industry, says Pemberton. He adds with regret that this regulation goes back to the EU, which wanted to protect its internal market. Of course, Great Britain is a third country now. If one of our orchestras loads up their own truck and sets out for 10 performances across the continent, they can only do the first 3 dates in the truck, he says. Then the truck has to return to the UK, which means everything has to be loaded onto a truck registered in the EU to fill the gap. The UK truck goes back to the UK, then comes back to the EU, picks up the load again, and finally completes the last 3 appointments. We find that absurd, and it's so little green. We thought the EU wanted to stop climate change, but we have to have useless truck driving back and forth. It doesn't make any sense at all. I'm sorry, Pemberton, but it does. We didn't decide that Britain leaves. In addition, it's expensive, and an orchestra incurred an additional £30,000 in transport costs in this way. And the head of the ABO fears that British orchestras will no longer be able to compete in the hard-fought music market because they would have to ask a promoter for more money than an EU orchestra. Yeah, third country. A study by the organization Best for Britain seems to show that Brexit is already hitting the British music industry hard. The number of British musicians performing at European festivals this summer has fallen by almost half compared to 2017 to 2019. Project Blackbird's John Reid plans to take this band to the continent this fall. The band has to shoulder around £1,000 in additional costs for the necessary customs declarations, also for the insurance and other things. But they still want to start the tour and be on stage in Geesthacht in Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, among other places. We are able to bear the costs. That's why we want to keep coming and playing in the EU. That's the heart of a musician. Younger bands or those who don't have the financial cushion won't come anymore, predicts John Reid. The gigs on the continent are very important for the small band to break through and get invited to festivals, says John. He sees nothing good in Brexit. But I have to repeat, the EU didn't decide that Britain leaves the EU, and so being a third country is not a fault of the EU. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.